Hey guys, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and I'm going to finally resume the series on the quick Ruy Lopez. We're going to take a look at an open Ruy Lopez line, and in particular, it's the Keres variation with Queen to E2. So here we have the kind of basic tabia starting position of the open Ruy. Of course, it's technically an open Ruy after knight takes E4, and there are some interesting sidelines. I think we discussed one or two of them in a previous video, but really this is kind of the fundamental starting position. Now, white has at least four major moves here. There's knight b to d2, there's c3, there's bishop to e3, and there's queen to e2. Now, a bunch of other moves have been played as well, but this really is kind of the grand, these are really the four major ones to choose from. So that's all we're going to look at really in this series on the open Ruy. Alright, well, the point of queen to e2, as the helpful arrows illustrate, is to put the rook on d1 and then play c4. So it's a very combative, very forceful approach. White is going to try to break down black's central setup, break him down on the light squares as fast as possible before black has finished developing. Now, the plan for this video is to look at three variations. We're going to look at kind of a screwball line here for black with g5, and then we'll look at the main move, which is bishop to e7, and after rook to d1, we'll look at a solid approach for black and a rather complicated approach for black. Both of them are of interest and have value, and certainly anyone who plays this system with white needs to know about both. Alright, but let's begin with kind of the screwball line, which is g5. And this has its tricky points. It's not trivial. And white definitely has to play in a very active and accurate way to prove an advantage against this. Now, black's idea is very clear. He wants to play g4. And the reason for this is quite normal. Not only is the pawn on e5 weakened if the knight is driven away from f3, but black also gets to fight, perhaps successfully, for the d4 square. So it's an appealing idea, but of course a move like g5 is also very weakening. Now, in some games, white has played the move rook to d1, and this makes some sense. I mean, it supports the knight going to d4, and it was part of white's basic idea with queen to e2 anyway, so why not play it? Alright, g4. Here, white could play knight to e1, but it's obviously a passive move, and black is slightly better after this. So knight to d4 would be the logical move, and it's really the whole point of playing rook to d1 in the first place. So takes, bishop c5. And now we see that white has committed himself to some kind of sacrifice. If the rook retreats, f2 falls. So we see white's idea. It's to play rook takes e4, take on e6, and then, while white is right now down a full exchange, black has a whole array of weak pawns on the king side, and it's also quite questionable what exactly his king is going to do by way of achieving safety. So white definitely has some compensation here, but he needs to play carefully. Obviously, queen takes e4 is not a good move because queen to d1 is mate on the very next move. But there are a couple of other possibilities that seem to be quite logical. For instance, queen takes g4. Why not? The d1 square is still covered, e6 is threatened, queen h5 check is threatened, and of course, sooner or later, queen takes e4 could be played as well. Maybe even queen to g7. So the queen looks really pretty well posted on this outpost. However, black has a really nice idea here, which kind of ruins white's fun. So you might want to give yourself a chance to try to solve it. A little tactical exercise here. Well, black's move should play bishop takes f2 check. And this is a rather startling move, but a very good one. So on king takes f2, queen d4 check. And it's surprisingly difficult for white to find a really pleasant move in this position. So for instance, if he plays king to e2, black calmly castles, threatening queen to d1, or even threatening rook h to f8 and then queen d1, or rook f2, or queen f2. So the white king is in big trouble. Knight to c3, for example, rook h to g8, and certainly black would be very happy to see queen takes e6 check, because then the queen would have to run back to h3, and it's poorly placed there. So queen e4, queen g1. And definitely the storm clouds are gathering around the white king. Bishop g5 is forced. Queen a1, takes. And materially, white's not doing that horribly. I mean, it's an exchange for a pawn. But his king is still in a little bit of trouble. His queenside pawns have some vulnerability. And black is very much for choice here. All right, back to this position. We looked at king to e2. Now let's look at king to g3. Well, on this, again, castling makes sense. Threatening to put a rook on the g file and win the white queen. So king h3, h5. And here, too, the position of the white king is very suspicious. White also has virtually no development to speak of, certainly not on the queen side. So again, I think black is clearly better here. So let's go back to this position here. We just looked at queen takes g4. Instead, knight to c3 seems to be a better move. So this keeps all the possibilities in reserve. White could play queen takes e4 or queen takes g4 next move. And he might also play knight takes e4. And then play bishop g5, rook d1, and get all of his pieces active as quickly as he can. So one sample line from this point is queen to d4, eyeing f2, but really hitting the pawn on e5. So bishop g5, queen e5, knight takes e4. White certainly has some threats now, like knight f6 check and bishop to f6. So bishop to e7 seems to be appropriate. And after takes, and queen g4, though, I would say that white has full compensation. So it's a slight material advantage for black, but obviously the black king is not perfectly placed on the chessboard, and white is going to have some play. Queen h4 check is a logical move in the near future. All right, so whatever we can say about that position, I mean, however you choose to evaluate it, clearly black is more or less okay, and white's trying to prove that the compensation is fully satisfactory. It's definitely not a refutation of g5. So if we want to refute g5, we need to find something better. And the answer is c4. This is very strong. Now, first of all, if black plays g4, continue with this plan, then white just goes forward. C takes d5. Okay, threatening not only these guys, but also queen takes e4. So that's how white would meet g takes f3. So bishop takes d5, and now rook to d1. And here we can see just how effective that c4 rook d1 strategy can be. All of a sudden, black's minor pieces, I mean these three guys here in the middle of the board, all look terribly vulnerable. All right, black should take, white takes, knight e5, queen e2. So black is up a full piece at the moment, but that's not going to remain the case for very long. The bishop on d5 is under attack, and white also has ideas like f3 or knight c3 especially, winning some stuff. So for instance on c6, knight to c3, and white has a decisive advantage. Knight takes e4 is threatened, knight takes d5 followed by taking on d5 is threatened, and if knight takes c3 by black here, then queen takes e5 check, if nothing else, is probably crushing. So this is a winning position for white. Okay, let's go back. Another black try is b takes c4. So taking the free pawn and attacking the bishop. But now the bishop finds another good square, goes to a4. If queen to d7, of course this would be a terrible move because of knight to d4. And if bishop to d7, now e6. So another nice move. F takes e6, bishop c6, knight e5. And here black is in some trouble. White threatens to pick up this piece here, but he also threatens queen h5 check. How would you defend with black? So black is worse no matter what, but he has to make a decision here what he's going to give up. Which would you give up? The check or the bishop? Well, in the game Boleslavsky against Gosta Stoltz from Salzgiobad in 1948, from the interzonal tournament there, the first interzonal, Stoltz played queen to d6, and this was a mistake. After queen h5 check, king e7. You can't go to d8 because of knight f7 check winning the queen, so king e7. Takes, king e8. Check again, same problem, king's got to go to e7. And now check, and white took the rook. And with an extra rook, more or less, the game is just over. It's maybe a bit of bad sportsmanship that Stoltz played on for another 13 moves, but anyway, it didn't affect anything, and white won very easily. So back here, the right decision for black was to play h5. And after knight takes d6, queen d6, at least black has this big, massive pawns in the center, and the knight on e4 looks quite nice as well. So white is clearly better after either knight a5 with something like this as a possibility. Kind of a funny line. White gives up his extra piece, but the black king is in terrible trouble, and white's clearly better. Or simply f3, and then knight to d4. And white's clearly better here as well. This would probably be my choice between those two variations. Anyway, black is in trouble regardless, and I think we can say that g5 belongs in the old trash can, as long as white realizes to play c4. Oh, I left out a move. Sorry. In addition to g4 and b takes c4, there's also d takes c4. And in this case, white just saves the bishop. Saves the bishop, attacks the knight, drives it back to c5, and now rook to d1. And then the g pawn is going to drop next. After which, black just has a position with a lot of weaknesses, and white doesn't. So white stands clearly better at this point. Okay. So the bottom line then is that g5 goes into the old trash can. So bishop to e7, rook to d1, and now c4 is coming next move. What should black do? Well, saying what he should do is maybe a bit much. I mean, he's got a few moves that are decent. Again, two of them we'll discuss in some detail. So castles is the main line, but knight to c5 is also a very interesting move, and it leads to some incredibly sharp play. The principled continuation for white is to play bishop takes d5, bishop d5, and now knight to c3. Alright, well what does black do about his bishop? If he plays bishop takes f3, the problem is that rook takes d8 comes with check, so white would simply be winning there. If black plays knight to b4, trying to protect this bishop, well, it's not going to work. Knight to e1, and now one thing to notice is that if c6, to shore up the bishop, well, now the knight has nowhere to run to after a3. So this is just fine for white. So a game between Kotkov and Gurganidze, played back in 1956 in a Tbilisi tournament, continued a3. And again, black is too late to keep everybody. So he played queen c6, a takes b4, bishop c4, queen to g4, and white stood clearly better at this point. Okay, so let's review this. So it's rook to d1, knight c5, takes, knight c3, and we've seen that knight to b4 doesn't seem to hold up. White plays knight to e1, getting his knight out of the way, protecting c2, and preparing a3. Alright, instead, the key move here for black is bishop to c4. Just sacrificing his queen, and hoping that his tremendously active minor pieces will give him sufficient compensation. So, in addition to maybe some small back rank worries that white has to deal with here, there are also things like knight to b4 in the offing. So queen to e3 seems to be best, and now b4. If the knight moves, then rook to d1 check is kind of unpleasant. So b3, bishop e6. Okay, if b takes c3, it's very important that white has bishop a3. Now the rook on a1 covers d1. The bishop on a3 hits the knight on c5. And, of course, we're also threatening this guy too. So white regains his material and stands better. So the best is bishop to e6. Now knight e4. Check. Knight e1. Knight to d4. Threatening knight takes c2. And this is still... We're not really out of theory at this point. We're kind of in the middle of a long, semi-forced tactical sequence. White plays bishop to b2. Protecting his rook, attacking black's rook, but of course doing nothing about knight takes c2. But now queen to e2. So this hits this guy, hits this guy. So rook takes a1, bishop a1, knight a1, knight c5, bishop c5, and now knight to d3 as usual. Okay, if the bishop goes back to this quiet square on e7, then knight f4 should be somewhat better for white. Eventually, the knight on a1 will perish, and black has enough weak pawns on the queen side in particular black has enough weak pawns that white should have some edge. Okay, so bishop to b6 is the officially approved move. Now knight takes b4, castles, knight c6 to take away the d8 square from the rook. And, alright, here we have some parting of the ways, believe it or not. So we're up to move 24, and even back in the 50s, this was a theoretically rich and deeply explored position. So I've got at least 5 or 6 game citations for you in this variation. Or no, I think 7 game citations. Make that 8. 8 game citations, 6 of which are from the 50s. So sorry, it took me a while to kind of scroll through everything here. All right, so just to give a very quick overview, I mean, because going through everything obviously would take a long time. So, all right, one game went king h8, and then queen to d1, takes, a5, and the game did not go for much longer. And yeah, here black resigned. Okay, it didn't have to be so cooperative. Queen f6 check is the problem, and yeah, black just has all kinds of problems with his king side. So that was Boleslavsky against Gurganidze, played in 1955 in a qualifier for the USSR National Championship. All right, instead of king h8, the usual move is f6. White plays h4 to take care of the back rank, and now black has chosen several moves. So he's chosen king h8, which is probably not very good. It's nice to get the king out of the way of some checks, but it's perhaps not the best use of a tempo, and white seems to stand better. And this occurred in a game between Boleslavsky and Karaklajic in Leningrad in 1997. So you guys can investigate that, continue with king to h2, and Boleslavsky eventually won. All right, next line, knight takes b3, very natural. AB, fe5, queen e5, bishop f2 check, king h2, bishop takes b3, and black seemed to be okay. In fact, a game between 2 strong then Yugoslavian grandmasters, Boris Ivkov and Milan Matulovic in Sarajevo in 1968, was agreed drawn in just a few more moves. And they're worth looking at. Knight e7 check, king h8, knight f5, and white has some very annoying pressure against g7, but black liquidated and took care of it. Simply rook takes f5. There's no back rank mate because the bishop can go back to g8. So the game concluded queen f5, bishop b6, check, bishop g8, queen a6, bishop d4, queen c6, and the game was agreed drawn here. I mean, there's no way for Ivkov to break through this fortress that black has. All right, so knight takes b3. This seems to be like a pretty good move. Finally, I think maybe the more common move. Let me do a quick check here. I certainly have more game references with it. Is f takes e5, which hits f2. So don't overlook that if you're in a position like this. All right, white plays queen e5. Now rook f6 is best, and here all kinds of things have been played. So g4, bishop f2 check, king h1, bishop h4 was the continuation in a game between the 2 Soviet grandmasters Alexei Swaytin and Yefim Geller, played in the Soviet Championship in 1958. Black is a bit better here, but it ended up a draw in 80 moves. Okay, another possibility is just the obvious move, queen takes a1. So we simply grab this, and okay, game continued, bishop f2, king h2, rook f4, g3, rook g4, and black eventually, well, soon in fact, won the 2 kingside pawns. But nevertheless, white was reasonably okay and drew in a game Harandi against Monokroussos, played in Stockholm in 1969. So this too is a long game. It went another 49 moves. It was drawn on move 82. Okay, so queen takes a1 is another try. A third try is knight to d4. And this has occurred in a couple of games. So Darga against Losa, played in West Berlin in 1959, continued with bishop to g4, king h2, rook f2, king g3, knight c2, takes, h5, and anyway, black's compensation for the lost material is inadequate, and Darga went on to win. Bishop f7 was played in a game between Alexei Swaytin, Swaytin had white in the Geller game too, so we've seen him on the white side before, but this time it's Boleslavsky on the black side. And that game ended in a draw in about another 10 moves. The next few moves were knight f3, knight c2, queen e4, bishop g6, queen d5, king f8, h5, bishop to e8, queen e4, and now black just gives up the knight finally, but is getting quite a bit for it, and this position is simply equal. and drawn in 3 more moves. So takes, a4, rook f6, and clearly this is a fortress. So there's no way for white to break through this. Alrighty, so that was knight to d4. And then a fourth possibility still is knight to d8. Alright, bishop to f7, takes, king h2, a5, again setting up this reasonably ideal queenside formation, and then h6, setting up shop on the king side as well. So I would say that white has a slightly more pleasant position here, and it's indeed white who is doing whatever torturing there was, but in the candidates match between Jan Timman and Artur Yusupov in Montpellier in 1985, Yusupov with black was able to hold and eventually draw in 76 moves. Alright, so this line looks really exciting and flashy with knight to c5 from here. So this all looks very exciting, but it seems to turn out after these long forcing variations that you get this endgame where if white knows what he's doing, black has to suffer. Should draw. It looks like the drawing percentage is pretty high, especially when there are really good players involved. But it looks like the only one with any winning chances at the end of the variation is white. Alright, so let's then look at the main line. And it was the main line back in the 50s too. It's just that line that we just looked at had its flurry of popularity. So that main move is castles. Okay, and now white plays c4, carrying out the threat. Takes, bishop to c5. Bishop e3, takes, and now the key move without which black would really be in trouble, and, well, if black did not have this resource, then this would be maybe not a bust of the open Rui, but it would certainly make the open Rui far less attractive than it is and has been over the decades. So see if you can figure out what that good move for black is at this point. Okay, the answer, queen b8, breaking the pin and counterattacking against b2, so that if bishop takes d5, it's just no big deal. So bishop takes d5, and just take, rook takes, queen b2, and, well, I don't think white's going to be very happy about this. So bishop takes d5 is perhaps a blunder, or at least a mistake. So bishop to b3 is the standard rejoinder, and now black plays knight a5. So again, there's no worry to the d5 pawn. The pawn on b2 will be hanging just as much this move as it was last move. Alright, well at this point white chooses between 3 moves. There's knight to e1, preparing perhaps to play knight to d3 and at some point move the knight to c5. There's the simple developing move knight to c3, aiming to swap off black's best minor piece. And finally, the main move is knight b to d2. Now, here the main move by a pretty long margin, or a pretty wide margin, or a long way, is queen to a7. But I will note that a 2008 game between Vasily Ivanchuk, who had white, and Hikaru Nakamura with black, rose and seemed to be fine for black. So Nakamura drew without too much difficulty. This was played in a rapid event in Cap d'Agde, again in 2008. And it continued like this. Rook d2, knight b3, ab3, rook c8, preparing c5. And doing so before white has protected the b3 pawn. So, rook to c1, queen to b4, and I think black is equal here. Maybe white has a tiny initiative at this point still, but fundamentally black is okay. So this might be an interesting alternative, knight takes d2. Anyway, the traditional move is queen to a7. And now white can choose between at least 3 moves here. There's knight takes e4, there's knight to d4, and there's queen takes a7. So let's have a quick look at each. Alright, let's begin with the move knight takes e4. Black plays queen e3, fe3, and now not the immediate de. It may not be that bad, but bishop takes e6, and then knight to g5 would be unpleasant, or if bishop e6, e takes f3, then bishop to d5 forks the rook and the f pawn. So knight takes b3 first, not only to preserve black's kingside structure, but to mess white's up, white's queenside structure. So ab3, de4, knight d4, and now c5. And you have this funny position here where both sides have just grotesque pawn formations other than their g and h pawns. But after rook d6, rook f to b8, I mean, all it's going to result is some kind of mutual pawn massacre situation where everything is going to evaporate and it'll end up as a draw. So knight e4 really doesn't get white anywhere. Knight to d4 is a bit more interesting. I mean, you're keeping the queens on, but still black is okay. Knight takes d2, queen takes d2, queen to b6, and black has some pressure against, or has some pressure along the b file. Is ready to play c5, and I think black is equal here too. Finally, the main move is queen takes a7, and after rook a7, white has a choice. You can either play rook a to c1, just going straight for pressure on the c file, or knight takes e4, where white plays to create problems with black's pawn structure, but as in the other variation, it also entails problems with his own pawn structure right back. So again, knight takes b3, ab, de, knight to d4. Okay, again, black could play rook to b7, but c5 will be the move here. Knight e6 is, again, kind of similar to what we've seen before, fe6, and both sides have terrible pawns. So knight to c6 is interesting. Here black could play rook to c7, but rook b7 looks the most sensible choice. And now b4 is a good move. So we at least plug up the b file if we're white. cb, rook a6. On the other hand, black gets one little benefit out of all of this. He plays bishop to c4, attacking the rook, and then drops this bishop on the very nice d3 square. And I think this position is equal. I don't think white has anything really to speak of here. Alright, so back to this position. Instead of knight takes e4, rook a to c1. So white just keeps building the position instead. But now c5 is another very nice move. Takes care of the pawn. It's not backward anymore. c4 might be coming. And after knight takes e4 again, knight b3, ab3, de4. So white doesn't quite get time to grab all of these bad pawns. Say knight to g5, e3. Okay, if f takes e3, the bishop goes to g4 perhaps, or actually bishop takes b3. So let's say knight e6, ef, king f1. The point of that is so that way f takes e6 doesn't come with a check. Fe, rook c5, rook f4, and maybe white has some purely nominal advantage, but really this is again just an equal position. White's b pawns are likely to fall, the a6 pawn is likely to fall, of course the f2 pawn will fall. It should just be a draw. So with that, we'll conclude our look at the 9 queen to e2 system. So as we saw, some very interesting positions can arise. Black definitely needs to know what he's doing. And given that this is a less common move than knight b to d2 and c3 in particular, and also even a little bit less popular than bishop to e3, it's fairly possible that many of your opponents won't really know this line down cold. But I think most of the time they will have at least a pretty good idea about reaching this position. I mean, that's really where black needs to get to. It needs to be accurate after that to make sure that he maintains equality. But if he gets to this point, he's probably not going to be more than slightly worse at worst. Anyway, give it a try, and if you have some great success stories with this, please let me know in the comment section of this post. And anyway, next time we'll take a look at some other ninth move choices for white, going back to here. So we'll look at some other choices for white here against the open ruling. All right, see you then. Bye-bye.